Welcome back, everyone. Please take your seats. Welcome back. I hope you have fully caffeinated, sugar, everything you need to hear our final panel and the final closing comments after our panel. So right now we have a wonderful panel that we're going to hear. Creating Urban Creativity, the Future of Cultural Cities. So if you like the names of the three panels, I made them up. If you don't like them, it was anonymous. Okay, this panel will be moderated by Dr. David Staley, who is the associate professor and the director of the Goldberg Center, no relation to me, at OSU Department of History. And we have three speakers on this panel today. We have Ms. Lori Martin, Senior Cultural Affairs Officer of the City of Toronto, my hometown. We have Tony Slanik, who is the Director of Planning and Urban Design for OHM Advisors. And we have Dr. Asim Inam, the John Boosfield Distinguished Visitor at University of Toronto. So please help me welcome Lori Martin.
Thank you very much for the invitation to today, and especially to Shoshana. Thank you so much. With respect to planning creative cities, I think Toronto is an interesting case study, since it has experienced the global trends that many cities have encountered and has developed a toolkit, a significant toolkit, to take local action in our city building. So to begin with, Toronto has been described as a city of neighborhoods, a cultural mecca, a kaleidoscope of ethnicities. New York City designed by the Swiss. It's all true, and we love it. However, the recent years have proved to be difficult, since Toronto has undergone intense development pressures. At last count, we had more construction cranes up in the air than New York City and Mexico City combined. So the first trend, global trend, I want to talk about is unprecedented growth. But thankfully, Toronto has had years of solid research and stellar policy in which to have in our back pocket when dealing with this sort of pressures. And I'm talking about that in much more detail. The second global trend, which many cities experience, is limited developable real estate. This is the Artscape Witchwood Barns. This was a project I worked on intensely for 8 years. More recently, Jamie Oliver, the celebrity chef, came over to understand the template because he wants to duplicate or replicate it in the UK. So essentially, when you have limited developable real estate, one of the things that you can do, a local action, is look at your municipally owned surplus brownfield sites. And that's what this was. It was a real eyesore. And what we did was we entered into a below-market rent lease with Toronto Artscape, a not-for-profit developer who builds community while making special places and spaces for artists and creative types. And we had them work on a feasibility study with the community, a business plan. They then entered into a contract with us to not only build affordable and sustainable live-work artist space, but a nursery school, a children's theater, a farmer's market space, affordable environmental NGO offices, community gardens, and a greenhouse. And they did it. They found the capital, and they operated on a cost recovery basis. So going forward, it was to not cost the city any money annually. And that's been the case for 8 years now? 6 years, sorry. What the city did do was provide the car barns. What the city did do was provide the surrounding land and cleaned it up. What the city did do was put in their capital budget money for a park to surround this community facility. We waived the development charges, and we paid a little bit of money for the feasibility study. And it's a real community jewel that the other 43 wards in our city want to have one in their neighborhood. Similarly, our local school board, their local action is to sell surplus properties. So again, this is an Artscape project, Young Place. They sold it to the not-for-profit Artscape. The city's role, City Hall's role, was to guarantee the financing with the bank, so that Artscape, because they didn't have the wherewithal to get proper financing. And that's just the inside of it. Third global trend is this whole awareness of climate change. Not so long ago, Toronto was described in the media as a city of disposable buildings. And that's not a good thing. Environmentally, this is not a very smart practice. That all stopped in its tracks when the Princess of Wales Theatre, a 2,000-seat theatre that was built less than 25 years ago, was under threat. The developer wanted to tear it down. Not only did they want to tear down this new theater, but they wanted to tear down the 4 abutting heritage warehouses. These warehouses had jobs and employers like architectural firms, planning consultants, graphic designers, folks that were working and competing on a global level. They wanted to knock the theater, the warehouses down, and do what? Put up yet more luxury residential condominiums. So luckily for us, just-in-time delivery, is we had the tools, i.e. in this case, well, both the cultural policy and the research to say that this entertainment district, where the theater and the warehouses were, had the highest concentration, the census tract, of artists, creative industries, and cultural facilities. So we have this crazy system in Toronto and in our province, something that's sort of like a quasi-judicial court. It's called the Ontario Municipal Board, where the lawyers all just duke it out. But because we had this really current research, we had this policy, we said, guys, this isn't good enough. And so what happened was, Starchitect Frank Gehry flew from Los Angeles to Toronto, back and forth, back and forth. We probably had about 6 meetings. The community was involved, and so it was a significant redesign of the towers that retained the non-residential creative industries, the heritage, and the arts. This is another example. This is the Evergreen Brickworks, which was a partnership between the city, the Regional Conservation Authority, and a not-for-profit organization. A former brick factory and quarry that was repurposed into a park, a natural area, and an environmental education center. In this case, it was the city early on that did a call looking for interested citizens to be on a public advisory committee to develop the vision And this is the granddaddy of the environmental cause, David Suzuki, sitting on a log there. And it's been super, super successful. The fourth trend I wanted to talk about, and some of this has been talked about already today, is this whole idea of the desire for authentic places and spaces. So this is West Queen West. It's deemed to be the second hippest neighborhood in the world, according to Vogue magazine. Second only to a neighborhood in Tokyo. And it was interesting, again, because of time-sensitive research that we got hold of when all of a sudden gentrification happened and the real estate pressures were intense. It was our office, the Economic Development and Culture Office, that was able to insert ourselves in the conversation with the developers and the city planners and the community and other interested groups to say, hey, this is really important to the arts. This is really important to the creative industries. And why? Because we have some research that was done, postal code by postal code, coast to coast to coast, or zip code for you guys, that says West Queen West is the 5th highest concentration of artists in all of Canada. And when we said that, we had a place at the table. It was ugly. It was a learning experience, but and we're really proud of what we accomplished there. A smaller project is the Toronto Sculpture Garden. This was a municipal parking lot. It was contaminated. And we did this unique business model. That we worked with a developer who was also a real fan of sculpture. And what we did was we gave him a below-market rent lease for this 3-story heritage building. And I think it was $2 a year. He, in turn, sublet that property at market value to a high-end restaurant and then a fancy consultant for stories 2 and 3. With that money that he got at market rent, he then annually put that money into the exhibitions of the sculpture garden. So it's been very successful, and this was the 30th anniversary. That's why there's these stacked cars, because it's a sort of a shout out to the roots of it being a municipal parking lot. Another one, which I thought was kind of interesting, again, a parking lot, contaminated, is this urban beach park. It's called Sugar Beach. And the city's role or action was to do a design competition. And Claude Cormier won. And these cotton candy umbrellas, which are hard shell, these pink cotton candy umbrellas are a bit of a nod to the abutting property, which is a large sugar refinery, which has these tanker ships that come in from all over the world with raw sugar cane. And it really draws both the residents and the visitors. And it's just a little bit of a baby step in the redevelopment of our waterfront. Repurposing historical buildings. This is Maple Leaf Gardens. Until a few years ago, the home of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And what happened here was, this was at a time when 2007-8, where the economy wasn't very good, and there was a lot of infrastructure stimulus funding available. I would say that the political support to talk to the right people was key in turning that, in adaptively reusing that heritage building into something new. So instead of a huge ice rink for our NHL team, it's now a flagship grocery store on the first floor. But there's a lot of memorabilia from the good old days, from the good old hockey days when we won the Stanley Cups, and a lot of interesting public art. The second floor is a training facility for Ryerson University, and then the third floor is an ice pad for the Ryerson University's men's and women's ice hockey. So it's kind of like taking it and flipping it around. So this was the city acting as a facilitator. And it was a partnership between a developer and the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, our social housing provider. And what happened there was we worked together to build a cultural hub, a cultural center, in the first phase of a multi-phase, multi-million-dollar redevelopment of Canada's oldest and largest social housing development. So the fifth and last global trend is attracting mobile talent and capital. And this is Toronto International Film Festival, TIFF. It's Toronto's calling card. And it's just one example of what attracts young, mobile people and capital to a city. It's also a classic example of the little engine that could. Because TIFF, which was started in the 1970s, was just three crazy guys, nomad existence, who wanted to show the best of the international films. And so our local arts council gave them a little bit of money, and now it is, without a doubt, you know, one of the best cultural events happening, second only to Cannes. And I just have to put George up there. CSI, I didn't even know what hot desks were a few years ago, but CSI, Center for Social Innovation, believes that society is facing unprecedented economic, environmental, social, and cultural challenges. And it wants to turn those challenges into opportunities. And Tanya Sermon, if you ever get to hear her TED Talk, or you want to Google her and hear somebody who's got so much energy and is just like, she's going to figure it all out. Tanya Sermon is who you want to touch base with. Anyway, they bought this great heritage building, and because their mission aligns with our policy guidelines, what the city did in this case was we guaranteed their mortgage so that they could get a competitive rate to make them more stable, to make them more successful. Two more. This is MARS. MARS stands for Medical and Related Sciences. And it started up just for that, but very, very quickly, all these venture capitalists wanted in there. And social innovation startups wanted to be in there. Richard Florida came from Pittsburgh and put down roots right at the very beginning. He brought Kevin Stolaric and all his team. And it's nestled in between the University of Toronto and all our teaching hospitals. And it is a fantastic, well, it's on a global scale, it is one of the top. And it just started with some babysitting, making sure that City Hall was aware that building permits were issued expeditiously, tax incentives were allowed in this case, because this is the sort of thing that we want to have in our town. But the relationship and the synergy has continued over the years, and just last month, a number, I should say, of the little companies here went with our new mayor over to China to forge partnerships on the international markets. So finally, what's up next? To be determined. We absolutely do not know, but we're starting to look at our waterfront in a comprehensive way. We want to take some catalytic waterfront sites and adaptively reuse them. We want to find that sweet spot between getting what the residents, the big ideas and the small ideas of the local residents, and what possible future international partners might want to work with us on. This is the Hearn generating station. It's on the scale of the Tate Modern. It won't be the Tate Modern. It'll be something like nowhere else. Thank you very much.
Am I on? I am on. So my name is Tony Slanik. I'm the fun guy in Columbus. I'm local. You can tell fun guys because they have interesting socks. And my daughter tells me she's just about to be 6 on Sunday, and she says, "Dad, you're the funnest guy I know." And I said, "You're damn right I am." So being the fun guy, you have to have an inherent desire to be happy, and you have to maintain happiness. And so it became sort of this thing where I kind of discovered, God, people like me. I'm kind of fun. I joke around a lot. I act goofy. I smile, even when I don't want to. And I think it's because I just want to be happy. And so it became sort of a passion of mine just to say, well, how does this all work, and how can we translate this into our society from a design standpoint? So I need this, don't I? So the big question is becoming, how do we measure the success and progress of a nation? Do we do that by the gross domestic product as a measurement, or do we do that by happiness? Happiness. Good answer. So I'm going to read a little bit, and then I'm going to become fun. Following World War II, governments began to adopt emerging measures of economic activity. In particular, the gross domestic product, boo, was used as an indicator of national progress. While it was flawed, it was an excellent tool for measuring progress toward the goal of increased economic production. So a really smart guy named Robert Kennedy said, GPD measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. Okay, so here we are, 2016, hard to believe. There's a growing global consensus that we need to have new measures of progress. So people like us in the 21st century, politicians, academics, and the general public are looking beyond economic growth to understand progress. It is critical that we measure, clearly reflect what we value, something our current approach fails to do. So this requires us to think differently about everything that we do, from connectivity, transportation, public space, density, everything that we control related to how we design spaces, how we design our cities. We need to be thinking differently, that out-of-the-box guy. And so the fun little quote here is, the possible benefits of required seatbelts would not justify the costs to the manufacturers and the public. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. But it was actually said by probably one of the most rigid systems in government in 1970. So we've obviously said, somebody made a decision, rightfully so, seatbelts are kind of important. They might save a life. And so we need to require those. So my contention is that we need to look at happiness and require it within our communities and develop policy around that. So we need to make a change. We can't continue to keep doing the things that we do and not take happiness into our thought process. So that all said, there's one thing that drives me crazy about the United States, and that's this. We create too much of this type of place and not enough of these type of places. So we need to strike a balance somewhere between there. By the way, the lights blind you. I can't see anybody right now. So from an economic development standpoint, we hear a lot of the economic developers and mayors and council all these guys trying to say, well, what are we doing? How can we make ourselves unique? And how can we create, jobs? And how can we get people to come to our community? And how do we track the millennials? And how do we do this? And how do we do that? So then they go up and they start talking. And if you do this, and then this amazing thing happens, and then we get this. That amazing thing, I'm going to say, is that we need to build policy and thoughts around this. That a miracle is really embracing happiness, and how do we create it? This thing didn't work. All right. So there's a lot of different studies out there related to happiness now, so that's good news. The Happy Planet as it relates to the environment. There's the Happiness Report that was developed in 2011 for the first time. 2013 the first time, initiated by the United Nations in 2011 to really look at happiness. Who's the happiest countries, who's the happiest communities? And it really becomes this sort of global conversation on what is our end result. What is the end goal, I should say. The end goal should be happiness. So everybody seen this movie? Thanks for everybody. Raise your hand if you've seen the movie. All right, so this is on Netflix. That's good news, right? You can just pull it down and watch it. It's really interesting. So the end goal, inspires this international conversation to talk about that end goal in a different way. And again, that's, what are the metrics of happiness? What are these key drivers of happiness? So health, right? Good one. Economy, important. Environment, your context, very important. The education, and of course, culture. So as it turns out, Mr. Happy here, you're wired a certain way, right? So 50% of your happiness is actually your genetics, your biological condition. So everybody knows the guy that looks at the glass half empty, and there's the guy like me that looks at it half full. And so you're just wired that way. So you don't really have a lot of control. Then there's a 10%, sort of your life conditions related to your economic condition. And that's something you sort of can't control either. But interestingly enough, there's a 40% that is context. It's really how you surround yourself and what do you surround yourself by? Where do you live? What country do you live in? What state do you live in? What city do you live in? What neighborhood do you live in? What kind of house do you live in? That's your context. Your context is who you hang out with, the organizations that you find yourself engaged with. It's how you create happiness in terms of what you surround yourself by. So as designers and creatives that are in this room, we control a significant amount of happiness. We control it. We create it. And we can really differentiate ourselves in the marketplace as leaders if we really take control of what we truly do. What we truly do is create and push that notion of happiness. So that starts to move into this idea of quality of life. And so the real notion here is happiness the economic engine of the future? Can we position ourselves from a happiness standpoint to really push the economic engine of our community? Can you be Tree City USA? Can we have Happy City USA? Can you hit a certain metric and become happy and get the Happy City designation? Is that even possible? Could be. So if we tie the quality of life and happiness together, there's an inherent value to that. So what is that value? It's the value of local character, the promotion of cities from a branding standpoint and public standpoint in terms of space. We add a premium to the housing. The value of connectivity. How do we connect to ourselves? From everything from fiber to roads. And how do we create an experience? We talked about creating an experience, not just a destination, not just one thing, but an experience. And how do you do that from a connectivity standpoint? What do our roads look like? What does our infrastructure look like? Is there an ability to design these things in a way that we can create happiness? The value of density. The preservation of green space, to be able to have gatherings and an emotional community conversation. The value of adaptability. Can we build buildings, you focus this as it relates to schools. Can we build a school that it has a future life, beyond the classroom? Can it get converted into an office space? You can ask the city of Gahanna, did they do something like that that really is an innovation related to where they could potentially go so you don't have a dormant school once the spike in enrollment passes? These are a value of high quality public realm, increasing the use of public space to create opportunities for businesses. Look, where are the businesses located? They're locating around parks. They're locating around recreation because that's an amenity that becomes an attraction mechanism to their model related to being able to attract talent. And then integrated decision making. So I work for an AEP firm, architecture, engineering, and planning firm. And it's really important that we all get together and have a conversation related to where we're going in terms of creating happiness. Because each and every one of us has an intrinsic value to how do we get there. We're all taught something a little bit different. We come from different perspectives, but those perspectives are really, really important in creating the confluence of ideas to be able to produce happiness, to be able to get it to happen, for it to be implemented and for it to become a reality. So context becomes really, really important. And again, if the big takeaway here is that we create that context as creatives. The social interaction and the self-expression of the different places that we go to are really important. Health, creating healthy environments, creating active and passive recreation spaces to be able to, to bring the community together, to have that community-based conversation. To be able to get these people to talk to us. Places are not just commodities. People are really the judge of where we go and how places function and sustain. So clients of ours ask us, would you tell me please which way I ought to go from here? Now our answer is always this, well, where do we want to go? And the more conversations that we have with our clients, the more we see that they all want to create this happiness. They just don't know how to say it yet. So policymakers have an opportunity to create that happiness. Improving the quality of our lives should be the ultimate target of public policies. But public policies can only deliver the best fruit if they are based on reliable tools to measure the improvements they seek to produce in our lives. It's a really important statement. So happiness is happy hour.
So hello everyone, my name is Asim Inam. Can we have the first slide, please, the next one? It's wonderful to be here. It's really great to be back in Columbus. I was here a few years ago. And I want to especially thank Shoshana Goldberg-Miller. I have known her work for several years, and her energy and dedication is really admirable. So it's great that she's here in Columbus and at Ohio State University. And it's been a really very interesting, very fascinating symposium so far. So I want to add to that by kind of extending and deepening the conversation. And the main thing I would say, one of the main criteria or ingredients of creativity is being open-minded. And I would really like us to take that on, being really open-minded. I know as many of us who are in practice or in policy are very action-oriented. And so very often we fall into this trap of formulas, answers, tell me 3 things I have to do and everything will be fine. Life doesn't work that way. And so I want us to really be open about what does it take to make radical change happen. So I'm going to talk about the everyday culture of planning cities. The reason I have planning in quotation marks is planning is sometimes thought of as master plans, zoning, land use regulations. And I want to open that up by showing you a couple of examples. So my approach is to show you some case studies. This is a caveat I want to really make because I've seen even very intelligent, very experienced people make this mistake of looking at case studies and saying, how can we do this here? Versus really analyzing it, learning from it, adapting from it. And I think we are smarter than that. And so case studies are not meant just to be copied, but to be learned from. And I'm going to extend this conversation by talking about the global south, which is essentially Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and a couple of stunning statistics that I think you should really keep in mind. First of all, 84%, let that sink in, 84% of the world's population lives in that part of the world. Second, in terms of cities, 97 of the 100 fastest growing cities are located there. So the 21st century in terms of cities and the urban is really about the global south, especially Asia, but also Africa. African cities are growing very fast. And those are actually the smaller cities. Lee Fisher talked about mid-sized cities. Sometimes it's the smaller and mid-sized cities that are growing at a faster rate. The third reason for looking at the global south is they have centuries. Some of these cities are thousands of years old. They have centuries of creativity and resourcefulness that we can actually look at. So what am I trying to do from this is to kind of tease out this kind of extraordinary creativity of this kind of everyday planning, could be formal, could be informal planning culture. So these are the three case studies. One is from Cairo, Egypt. This is Al-Azhar Park, this concept of city as flux. The second one is a housing program in Mexico City. And the idea is, how do you plan for the unplanned? And the third is from India, which I'm sure most of you don't know, is the largest temporary city in the world. And your mind will be boggled when you see not only how big it is, but how they do it in 5 months. They put up the city and they take it down in 5 months. That's real creativity. So the first one, city as flux. Al-Azhar Park in Cairo. So this was the site. Obviously, Cairo is, again, one of those cities that's thousands of years old, very rich in history. This was one of the few remaining open spaces in Cairo. It's in a very low-income historic area. And these mounds that are being cleaned up in this photograph was essentially a 500-year-old garbage dump. So you can imagine that, with a lot of building debris, construction debris, etc. So one of the first things they had to do was to clean it up. And this is what it looks like now. This is, again, surrounded by this very dense, historic, low-income area. It cost $30 million, opened about 10 years ago. And the design of the park itself is a contrast between more formal, informal, lush areas, dry areas, flat and hilly sections. So a couple of inspirations for the design of the park. First of all, there's centuries of tradition of beautiful Islamic gardens all over the world, North Africa, Middle East, but South Asia, even Spain has Islamic gardens, but also an embrace of its urban location. We saw some great examples with the Brooklyn Bridge Park and some others. Very often, like Central Park in New York City, these parks are designed in an anti-urban way. It's kind of an escape from the city. It's a negation of the city. Here, it embraces the urbanity. So you can see the city around you. It's lined up with the historic monuments of Cairo, even like the promenades and so forth. So this notion of city as flux. So from the beginning, just the design and building process had to adapt. First of all, cleaning up this 500-year-old garbage dump. Obviously, the soil was polluted. It had to be stabilized. And then in the middle of the design process, the city of Cairo suddenly decided we are going to put 3 gigantic water tanks there, because that was the only open space left. So they had to redesign it again. So the design process itself had to be very adaptive and creative. And then it gets more interesting, more complicated. So while they were cleaning up this dump, they found this historic wall from the 12th century, the Ayyubid Wall, which was at that time sort of the biggest archaeological find in Egypt, which is saying a lot. And so they decided to keep the wall and restore it. So what was a landscape architecture project became a historic preservation project. And because it was next to a low-income area, they said, why not make this historic preservation project into a job training program? And in a historic country like Egypt, where there's so many historic monuments to be restored and renovated and adapted, it's a great job to have. So you can see in the image on the right, so this is the old wall, cleaned up, that they were training low-income residents of the surrounding neighborhoods to do this kind of restoration work on that. And then, of course, they incorporated the wall into the design of the park. And then through this interaction with the neighborhood and community, they realized there were other needs. Because it's a very old area, a lot of the housing is falling apart, needs to be rehabilitated. So they started a housing rehabilitation program with the community, as you see here. And then it gets even more interesting. So it became, again, through more interaction with the community, it became a microfinance program which supports small businesses, workshops, and new enterprises. So what was a landscape design of a park became historic preservation, then became job training, then became housing finance, and then became microfinance, and still going on. So the idea here, it's a very interesting creative design process that's a never-ending project. And if you think about it, a city is a never-ending project. It constantly gets renewed, demolished, redesigned, and so it's a very interesting idea of seeing place as a never-ending process. So I'm just giving you a quick snapshot of this case study. For those of you who are interested, it's described much more in detail in this book, Designing Urban Transformation. The second one, Planning for the Unplanned, is this housing program called Renovación Habitacional Popular in Mexico City. And the reason for this program was the 1985 earthquake in Mexico City. There was a lot of devastation. It killed an estimated 10,000 people and destroyed about 100,000 housing units. And as you see in this image, a lot of it was in the historic center of Mexico City. So what's remarkable about this program was that it either repaired or rebuilt 50,000 housing units in about 2 years. So another reason I'm talking about the Global South, what makes this even more impressive is these countries are poor countries. They don't have the kind of resources we have in the US or Europe. So they have to learn to do a lot with a lot less, which is the definition of being resourceful. What makes it even more interesting was most of this housing was for low-income families, and they didn't have to displace people. So a lot of these were low-income families who were living in a lot of typical low-income tenement housing, which is falling apart. You have it, I know we have it in New York City, a lot of cities where it's owned by slumlords who barely maintain it. It's not really up to code. So they did a number of changes. So one was the design. They opened it up. There are a lot of courtyards. It's brightly colored. And the two shifts is from renters, they became owners of their housing, which give them security, that this belongs to them. And then it improved the quality of the environment. So it wasn't just, there's a disaster, let's just rebuild the housing. It was like, how can we significantly improve existing conditions? And then some buildings like this one were in fairly decent shape, so they were repaired. But the main reason they were built or repaired in the same site is people have very strong social networks and access to jobs and transportation networks. Even though it might be cheaper and faster to build outside the city or in the suburbs, we get big plots of land for cheaper prices. This was the reason they were done. So this is an example of an older building in the historic center of Mexico City, which was repaired. So what was interesting also was how they mobilized funds. A lot of this money came from the government of Mexico and the World Bank. Actually, the World Bank had given them money for infrastructure. They renegotiated that loan and made it for housing. And also the designers were very sensitive to economic needs. So they had these shops and all that integrated into the new housing. A key aspect was, you see this number, 100 community groups. The community really mobilized because the government's first knee-jerk reaction was, okay, let's forget about this, let's go outside the city, build brand new concrete buildings, it's cheaper, faster. And the community said, no, we want it here. So it wasn't a lawsuit, but they politically negotiated agreement where they came to terms, including like this is one of the community leaders, the Swiss Red Cross contributed. So the amazing partnerships. So you can imagine coordinating with 100 community groups. It was quite astounding. So in this case, it's been presented as this new and innovative program. But when you actually do the research, you find it uses a lot of existing policy tools, and I have some here. So the successful aspects of the program were rapid action. I already mentioned nearly 50,000 units in 2 years, massive funding, improved conditions, community outreach, and institutional coordination. And then I analyzed why were they successful. And the reason was this: existing institutional routines. So this is an example of where bureaucracy actually works. It's the creativity of bureaucracy. And so there were existing arrangements, policies, programs, and practices that were quickly modified and used. And when you have gigantic bureaucracies, as somebody mentioned earlier, they move very slowly. Then how can you make them more creative? Well, you take existing tools, modify them, and apply them very quickly. And the last piece I looked at is why were these effective, these routines? So we talk about like existing policies and procedures, they're just red tape, it's just bureaucracy. Actually, there are a lot of things. First of all, there's legitimacy, in the sense that everybody knows about it, it's politically legitimate, it's accepted. Second is specialization. So a lot of the government agencies that ran this program already knew how to do low-income housing. Not always well, but they learned from their mistakes. So they knew housing finance, housing design. And finally, in terms of institutional fit. So a lot of it was trial and error, which was a big part of it. So this case study is described much more in this book, Planning for the Unplanned. Again, I'm giving you a quick snapshot. The third one is this incredible example of the largest temporary city in the world, which is in India. So every 12 years, it's called the Kumbh Mela, is held in the city of Allahabad, where 2 sacred rivers converge, and with 100 million people coming over a period of 55 days. So usually they stay for 2 or 3 days, but that's the total. So can you imagine designing a city for that many people for 55 days? So this is what it looks like. It's very beautiful, and it was, all this was done in 5 months. It's done after the monsoon season, which is a rainy season, and they start working on it. This is an example. So it's a religious festival. This is an example of one of the gathering spaces of one of the Hindu sects. And I'll show you a little bit more detail. This is a snapshot of the city itself. It's a city of tents. So it's not just housing, but they have to provide roads, bridges, sanitation, power grid, hospitals, train station, and a police force also. So how do they do it? So obviously there are some very simple tools, like the main streets are laid out on a grid. These are all temporary. And the names and alignments are the same. So this festival is every 12 years. So some things remain the same, which is the street grid. So in 2013, which was when the last festival was held, there were about 14 different sectors. So these streets are used to divide the city into sectors, which makes it more manageable. But what's also interesting is how the roads are made. So they use the mud and sand into street foundations. But what's interesting about this photograph is these steel plates that they're laying down. They're designed so 4 men can carry them. So they're kind of modular, by hand, piece by piece.